Hey, good morning. This is Anthony, parent of IRS Medic. Today is Wednesday, October 16th. Thank you so much for joining us today. And it's actually hard for me to believe this is going to be what we're talking about today. What we're going to be talking today is about Donald Trump. He supports ending double taxation. And with us today is Jim Gosart of Republicans Overseas. And I met Jim in 2017 at the repeal FATCA hearing. And Jim, what I want to start off with, because you know exactly how this came into being. This proposal came up. This is not a last minute thing whatsoever. This is a planned long-term thing. John, you and I, we've all been on this for a long time. John and you a bit longer than me, but we've been all on this, and this is not a spur of the moment thing that has happened whatsoever. And I guess here we are. Jim, thank you so much for joining me. And this is what I wanted to start off with. When I met you, this is the thing that you said to me. You said, Anthony, I said, because you worked in Hong Kong. I remember that. You said
Correct.
you worked familiar with Hong Kong. And you said to me, he's like, look, I got to tell you something. There are jobs that Americans are denied around the world because of that U.S. double taxation that employers, international employers don't want to hire Americans. And so in my mind, I'm like, well, that's the way to frame it. The way to frame this issue. So thank you so much for joining us today, Jim.
It's a pleasure to be here, Anthony. Thanks so much for having me on, and it's great to have my good friend John to join him on this podcast. If I can, there's a little typo in your
oh yeah, that's the yeah, I didn't have the readers on when I did that, right? I did it again. Oh my God. Yeah, I keep on putting that. That's just my habit there. Thank you, Jim. Thank you for that.
That's okay. Yeah. If any hate mail goes to BOSART, that's fine. No, that's another way to. But you're right, Anthony. And but there are, as John has reminded me, I've had, like, in the 26 years I lived abroad. I live full time in Sarasota, Florida now, about a mile from where Hurricane Milton made landfall, actually. And if your viewers could spare a thought and a prayer for Floridians who are impacted, it would be appreciated. The devastation is unbelievable. But yes, I did spend 26 years living abroad. Most of that was in Asia, and Hong Kong was the longest. I lived in Hong Kong for 16 years. And as John has reminded me, I have to say the double taxation issue. We know a lot of people whose lives have been devastated by double taxation. We all know dozens of people. There are heartbreaking stories. I'm not one of those. I managed to navigate my way through it for those 26 years. But what's somewhat unique about my experience, Anthony, is, as John has convinced me, I've had like 4 or 5 different tax lives. And I can get into that later as a taxpayer. But one of them, as you point out, during the FATCA years when we met, I was teed up. I had recently retired. I was doing consulting in Hong Kong. I was working with search firms who wanted to bring me on for various board positions and so forth. And when FATCA hit, that all dried up. It died, and those same recruiters it told me, look, you're an American citizen. I can't bring you on a board of directors. Now that may sound like, again, this is not the kind of thing that devastates someone's life, but it falls in the category of the influence of American business around the world. And that's a point that I think Art Laffer made in his interview with Kudlow a couple nights ago on this subject. And it's one of, like I say, I've had 4 different tax lives, but maybe 5. But it's one of those, one of many, many layers of issues you run into because we are double taxed, because of citizenship-based taxation. And the only solution is really to get rid of it. And President Trump, we're thrilled with the statement. And Anthony, I've been in this thing for more than 10 years with Republicans Overseas. First of all, I think there's 2 points that your listeners and viewers, I'd want them to capture from this podcast. One is, from everything we can tell, President Trump is darn serious about this. This is not an opportunistic one-shot, announcement that he made, get a couple of headlines and then it goes away. And I can go through specifically why we feel that. The second thing that your viewers ought to realize is we've been working like crazy for 10 years. John's been in this with us almost that entire time. And I certainly can go through each of those steps, time permitting. Exactly how many battles have we fought, and the angles we've taken, what happened, what we learned, what credibility we gained over the years, and that 10 years of credibility is paying dividends right now. And it paid big dividends in terms of getting the candidate for president of the United States to issue an announcement that is truly the most significant announcement I think ever regarding the reform of tax for overseas Americans and bringing to an end citizenship-based taxation.
This is just amazing. Here we are again. Here we are. Those of you joining us, I'm Anthony Parent, and we have been working on removing a double taxation for a long time. And it's just truly amazing that we're really talking about this. Now, I do want to invite everybody who's watching live, if you could put your comments about how double taxation is impacting you. And I want to cover, and I do see some comments already from some new viewers, how double taxation is affecting you around the world and how it's destroying your opportunities. I think that's really the sell on this, because the difficulty that we have is getting homeland Americans to care about this issue. And I think one of the issues that we had was we were trying to say, hey, end citizenship-based taxation. Then John and I had to do a video on what John presented a video what exactly a citizenship-based taxation is, and so it's difficult to get people to rah around an abstract idea. But when you say double taxation, now you have something, because now the other side has to defend double taxation. They have to say, oh no, hold on, double taxation is a good thing. Oh, why is that? Well. And there we are. So I do want to introduce the great John Richardson right now. John has been, for the past years, John has developing content that has been fantastic, has made me a better attorney, has made me a better human being. The great John Richardson is here with us. And so, John, how did you first this is something I don't know about you. I don't know how you first got involved in this. What was that thing that said, hey, this is crazy what the United States is doing? Was it something personal or just something you ran into?
Well, I guess it was a conflection of a couple of things. Around 2011, I was sort of tired of what I've been doing. And I think I was in sort of semi-retirement, or maybe I was retired. I don't know. Interestingly, within a week, I got all these bills, to keep up my bar admissions in Ontario and New York. And I was thinking, do I really want any of this? And then what happened was, in the summer of 2011, the Obama administration launched an absolutely vicious, unprovoked, outrageous attack on Americans abroad, ushering them into the offshore voluntary disclosure programs. Or maybe they weren't doing it directly, but certainly the compliance community was.
Oh, yeah.
And I live in Toronto, Canada, where there's a lot of course, probably anywhere in Canada, there's a lot of people from the United States, but particularly in Toronto, because there were two great waves of immigration, depending on your perspective, in the United States. The first was the whole Vietnam thing. Okay, and most of those people are actually dead now, but a lot of Americans came to Canada to avoid that. But the second was that in the late 60s, early 70s, there was a massive expansion of the Canadian university system, and there were tremendous numbers of PhDs in the United States ended up in Canada. And, so there were just a lot of, people from the United States in Canada, and a very large number of them had naturalized as Canadian citizens. The draft people, for fairly obvious reasons, the academics because they just realized that this is where their life was going to be. You know, they were on the 10-year track and this sort of stuff. So there were a lot of people here who believed that they were not American citizens. And from an immigration citizenship law point of view, they were not. But what was happening was that the message, the drumbeat from the compliance community was that they were, even if they weren't. Okay, they were because they didn't have a certificate of loss of nationality. And I had for me, it was interesting because I saw this from a citizenship point of view before I saw it from a tax point of view. In other words, my view of this was that this was just totally outrageous. This trying to reclaim people as U.S. citizens, particularly since there was no doubt in my mind that, particularly the Vietnam people definitely intended to relinquish U.S. citizenship by becoming Canadian. I mean, that was, largely the point of the exercise. So I got into it from that point of view. And, I had a tax background. I mean, I had both U.S. and Canadian law degrees. And, I had a sort of a tax background from that. And I got interested in it. And it really bothered me and still bothers me. And so, I got involved in this. I mean, I've devoted tremendous time in this from both the tax and the citizenship point of view. But anyway, that was my involvement. I met Jim. I have a feeling it was around 2015 or 16, somewhere in that range.
That's my recollection, John.
Yeah, when the preparation for the FATCA hearings began. But I was well aware of the FATCA legal action lawsuit that Republicans overseas have been involved with. And I also was the co-chair for the Alliance of the Canadian Defense Canadian Sovereignty, which actually put together the Canadian FATCA lawsuit that ran for a good 10-year period. So that's sort of my background in this in any case.
So that's how you got involved. And by the way, for myself, this is why I got involved in it, because I was a tax resolution attorney doing regular tax resolution work. I had an ad. This is how far back we're going. I had an ad in the Yellow Pages, and an individual nearby called my office while I was at a tax conference, and he said, "I have a $7 million bank account in UBS that's undisclosed. Is this something you can help with?" And I said, "Sure, absolutely, whatever." Then I learned about an FBAR. I was like, "Oh, wow, that's something." And so, here's the thing: he was my first client. He intentionally did it, and so that really didn't bug me because, I looked at the penalty regime. I was like, you know what? You're actually making out better because you've been, if you actually look at how long you've been avoiding taxes, this is actually not a great deal. Next client, same thing. He intentionally avoided reporting. So I'm like, okay, this is interesting thing, helping people get into compliance, avoid going to criminal law. But then all of a sudden, I got a different type of case. I started getting people who did nothing wrong and just made reasonable assumptions. And I'm looking at this to say, well, wait a second. You're telling me somebody who made a reasonable assumption that there's no one to, the tax industry wasn't really aware of the FBAR type. Trust me. So a lot of people were just punished for their ignorance substantially, and the anxiety and the ruination. And I'm looking at all people losing their entire life fortunes over something that doesn't seem to make any sense whatsoever. So it was sort of like really bugging me, just like, this is really bugging me. And I was also, and then this is the thing that really did it for me, is I saw the tax industry exploiting people, exploiting with fear and just not caring. And this is it. These firms just wanted to be paid substantial amounts of money to hand over and surrender the client to the IRS. And it was just, and I'm looking at these things that were done. I'm like, oh my God, you hired the worst. This person ruined you. We can't undo this. And it was just, so that's been also part of my mission, is because the tax industry exploits this and they just don't care. They just don't care. Hey, look, revenue is revenue. And that's really the thing that motivated me on this, to actually try to end this, even though, hey, look, it actually will decrease our clients. We have a lot of clients overseas. It's okay. It's okay because it's just that inhumane. So that's how I got into it. And then I met you in person, John and Jim, at 2017. So that's how we got here. So let's talk about like the first thing that happened, Jim. What was the first thing? Okay, so we kind of getting the band together here, right?
Yeah.
We're getting the band together. So what's the first thing that what's the first song on our set list here as we go through this?
Well, in terms of the sequence for today.
Yeah. Well, no, because I think you have a history you want to go over, right?
Well, I do, but
Okay,
I
great.
also I could talk about go back in history, or we could jump right into the Trump decision and how it happened, or we could either way you want to do it, Anthony.
Ooh, why don't we back it up a little bit? Because I think the real point we're trying to make is that people think, and again, this has been said that this was a last minute pandering decision.
Not at all.
And not at all. So I think we could blow it out. I want to blow that argument out of the water here. So why don't we do that?
Okay. All right. Look, I'm currently executive vice president of Republicans Overseas. We have about 35 chapters around the world who are connected and active. We first got involved in around 2013 or 2014 in when FATCA was about to be implemented. You recall that the law in which FATCA was embedded was passed in 2010, and the law didn't go live until 2014. At that time, I was in Hong Kong, and of all of the Republicans Overseas chapters, our president was based there, Michael DeSambri, who went on to become the ambassador to Thailand in the Trump administration. Michael was president of globally of Republicans Overseas, and he was also our chapter president in Hong Kong. He and Solomon got together, and with the support from Reince Priebus and a few others, Bruce Ash, Jim Bopp, and so forth, felt that the best way to challenge FATCA, and really the purpose of challenging it was to advocate on behalf of Americans living abroad. That was the purpose. That we saw this as a serious injustice, unfair, unconstitutional. Jim Bopp identified about 6 different claims where showing that FATCA is an unconstitutional law. And on behalf of Americans, all Americans living worldwide, we felt that the right thing to do was to challenge this law in the courts. And Jim was formerly chief counsel for the RNC. He was our chief counsel for Republicans Overseas in these days, and he took the lead on that lawsuit. So and I have to say, in those days, as in 2014, in those days, the Hong Kong chapter of Republicans Overseas was one of the more active, probably one of the noisiest.
Yeah.
We also had among the American population in Hong Kong, you got a lot of financial people, a lot of finance industry is huge there. So you see a real impact of FATCA as it gets implemented. And so that lawsuit then was initiated. Mark Crawford was one of 9 plaintiffs, and the Mark is still still chairman of Republicans Overseas Albania, one of the most prominent Americans in Albania. So the lawsuit was or the case was officially named Crawford et al. That's why that's Crawford. And we pursued it through the Fifth Circuit in Ohio. Jim saw some difficulties with this because the Fifth Circuit and the Supreme Court had differing views on what constitutes standing. And he was anticipating that the Fifth Circuit would deny standing and it would be appealed, and that the Supreme Court would take the opportunity to hear the case, in part because it was a good case, but also in part because the Supreme Court has a different view of standing. And what I mean by that is the Fifth Circuit very firmly believed that in order to grant standing, harm had to be done. There had to be an injured party. harm had to be inflicted. And what we were doing was bringing a case in advance of FATCA having been implemented. It had just been passed. It had just been implemented. You didn't have any victims, but you could see the impact that this law was going to have. Okay, so Jim felt, all right, we're gonna bring this case in the Fifth Circuit, and Mark being the lead plaintiff, that had something to do with it too, because his state residence is Ohio. So as predicted, the Fifth Circuit denied us standing, and on appeal, it was denied as well. It went to the Supreme Court, and Jim felt convinced that the Supreme Court was going to grant us standing because the Supreme Court looks at standing from a different perspective. They feel that you don't have to necessarily have harm, that harm doesn't necessarily have to have been inflicted on the plaintiff, that the potential for it, the threat of it, an unjust law is reason enough. Well, that took about 2 or 3 years to play out. And as we all know, the Supreme Court did not grant us standing. But I'll tell you, in the course of conducting that lawsuit, we learned a lot. We, including the fact that you want to change the tax law. Changing the tax law is not for the faint of heart. It's a very, very, very difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
You don't merely have to show that a law is unconstitutional. Silly me. Hey, what the heck? You have to. It is a very difficult thing to do. And during the process of that lawsuit, we developed a fond appreciation for that, but also we developed a lot of credibility in both in the legislature, in the courts, our political connections, and very, very much so within the Republican National Committee itself. And I'll say this, that Republicans Overseas is not part of the RNC. And there are advantages and disadvantages to that, for sure. But because we are not part of the RNC, it gives us more latitude to do things like sue the Treasury Department. You couldn't do that if you were a state party. And we can advocate more aggressively on behalf of Americans abroad because of that stature. So that's kind of that was kind of step one. It was a long process.
So what was the biggest lesson you learned from the FATCA lawsuit? What was the biggest takeaway from that?
Well, we were onto something. I think what we knew was that this is a major issue for Americans of all stripes living all over the world. And we just had to keep at it. I think that was the major
takeaway. Was okay. We're going to keep going.
Yeah, and I think what we came away with was you had the beginning of a core group within Republicans Overseas that really understood the issue, and we built upon that. And it was about that time, right about that time, that John connected with us.
All right, so John, is this bringing you back? Is this bringing you back to? Are we in the timeline? Are we at the FATCA hearing yet in 2017?
Not yet.
Not yet. So where are we in the timeline?
Well, I'll tell you now we're 2016, 2017. There are a couple of things that overlap here, Anthony, but I think another thing that occurred right about the same time, and again, this is one that I can tell you how it worked out because I was in the hearing room. Solomon, who is our CEO, and I think a lot of your viewers know Solomon. You know Solomon, of course.
Yeah.
A lot of our viewers know Solomon. Solomon was at the time, and he was for 24 years, the national committee man for the state of Oregon. So he's a voting member of the Republican National Committee. He was also co-founder of Republicans Overseas, and he remains our CEO today. Solomon was also on the platform committee for the RNC heading into the 2016 election. And at this point, so you can see these things, and Reince Priebus is still at this point the chairman of the RNC. And so at this point, the issue of FATCA, the issue of, as we called it then, citizenship-based taxation, still a word we're going to have to use these interchangeably till we, I think, fully convert over to the best way to describe this as double taxation. We were doing a lot of lobbying within the RNC. So during the FATCA lawsuit period, myself and a mix of probably 10 other chapter leaders regularly attended RNC national meetings. We could have had anywhere between 3 and 8 or 10 of us attending each RNC meeting. And why? We wanted to get the word out about who we are and the tax plight of Americans living abroad and the importance of the overseas vote. That also is not an easy thing to do. But over the course of a couple of years, I would say from 2014 to 2016, a lot of people, I would say at that point, I probably knew a third of the voting members of the RNC. So now you get to in the run up to the convention in the 2016 election, and the platform being drafted. And what Solomon was able to do was get a lot of support within the platform committee to insert into the platform a call to repeal FATCA and also to end citizenship-based taxation.
Yeah, right.
Okay, that's how it got there, Anthony.
Right, I know. And well, this is, and I don't know if we want to answer this yet, but this is the question we'll probably get to later. Thank you for all the hard work on this. Question: was Republicans overseas able to communicate the issues of CBT back at the 2016 Trump admin? If yes, why did the Trump administration ignore this? I don't know if we want to answer this now, but because it's essentially, I'm excited, because in 2017 we had the FATCA hearing, and that's Solomon, his energy, his will, he just wants this done, right? And so I'm like, hey, look, it's in there. It's in the platform. This is going to be great. 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Hey, move to residency-based taxation. This is going to be great. This is going to be great. Then we get the thing. Then we get the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and we have two things that are a little new there, and they really impact the American overseas. GILTI, a terrible acronym for Global Intangible Low Tax Income. I mean, come on. And then we have the transition tax, which is a retroactive tax on income never received. So, we kind of didn't,
that wasn't exactly intended, was it?
Yeah. So, and in my mind, I don't think, bless his heart, I don't think Donald Trump understood what he's signing. He said, "Here, just sign this." And I mean, who really is going to understand it? That's just my conjecture, because that's the nature of how tax bills are made. No one understands it. That's the point of it. The point of a tax bill is that no one understands what it is, even the people signing it. So that's kind of my okay, that's what I think happened, but that is a fact. And if someone brings it up, hey, look, he promised this before, and what did you get? And that's the thing. It does seem okay. Why should we believe him again?
I think what we learned there is we were working the regular channels on the legislative side.
Yeah.
And what ultimately became the holding bill. So our effort at the time was to work the legislative side and get a standalone bill that could be incorporated into either the 2017 Jobs Act or whatever may follow. And we really underestimated that. Yeah. We got the bill was a good bill. We can debate whether it could have been better and all that other stuff, but that holding bill would have provided a lot of relief for a lot of Americans around the world. We think now there's a better way to do it. Yep. But I think the shortcoming there, Anthony, was we couldn't get that bill into the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It was later introduced it was later finalized as a standalone. Congressman Holding introduced the bill, but it was late in his tenure. He was then apportioned out of his role, but that was a big loss. It was a painful loss.
Yeah.
And boy, did we learn a lot from that one. And by the way, transition tax, just on a personal note, that one caught me right between the eyes. At that point, I had retired from GE. I worked for GE for 35 years, and about half of that time, more than half of that time, I was based abroad. And so at that time, I had formed a small business in Hong Kong, and I was operating on my own. And yeah, I ended up paying tax on something like 6 or 8 years worth of retained earnings. And how any I got through it. This was another example. It didn't destroy my business. It stung really hard. It was unfair and ridiculous at so many levels. I mean, I cannot believe that in the wisdom of the U.S. government that they intend to do that to American small business owners living abroad. But that one caught me right between the eyes, and it was just ridiculous. How the heck any small business owner keeps their business afloat when they got to pay all this kind of taxes, crazy stuff that the guy next door to him doesn't have to pay,
Right.
Anthony?
Yeah.
That's the competitiveness issue there from a small business standpoint.
Right, exactly.
I got through it as a consultant, but a small business owner, a bar in Long Kwai Fong in Hong Kong, or a retail shop in, say, Holland Village, Singapore. A lot of Americans have businesses like that. How the heck they keep those businesses going when the guy across the street doesn't have to pay that kind of taxes beyond me? And we got to get that fixed.
Yeah, we need to make Americans competitive globally. I think that's what it's.
John? For sure, John.
Yeah, John.
Yeah, part of the thing, just to add a little bit to the discussion, we go back to the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. What's interesting was that if you were to go back and look at the newspapers and everything at that time, right, the focus was on territorial taxation for corporations. Yeah. In other words, sort of ending the the worldwide taxation. There actually was there was significant discussion of ending it for Americans abroad as well at the time. Okay,
right.
The focus was on basically multinationals moving to a territorial system. But if you go back and look, there's no mention of GILTI. Okay, I mean, the U.S. never moved to territorial taxation at all. That's the biggest con ever.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, through the GILTI rules, what they did, they say, well, yeah, territorial taxation, you don't have to pay a tax when you pay a dividend, but that's because we're going to tax it before you pay a dividend, right? I mean, that's what GILTI. I mean, it's one of the most outrageous lies ever coming from these tax people.
Yeah.
And the transition tax, if you were to, there was never any mention, any possibility or discussion of that applying to individual Americans, much less individual Americans abroad. And I think that the reason for that was partly that resident Americans with CFCs were able to use that S-Corp election to avoid the problem altogether.
Yep.
Leaving individual Americans abroad high and dry on the thing, right? So, I mean, if that weren't an argument for, ending citizenship taxation, I don't know what there could be. I mean, a lot of people had to liquidate their businesses, to pay the tax. I mean, it was shocking. And, of course, the Moore decision came down, recently. And we at C, that's an organization I'm part of, Stop Extraterritorial American Taxation, filed an amicus brief on that, really laying out the problem for individuals abroad. There was no mention of that. So, that was the context, right, of how these two, horribly unfair, unjust laws came to be. And the holding bill was really a year later. It was in December of 2018. The tax judge, that was, of course, December of 2017, I guess. And that was, again, I make the point that, RO, Republicans overseas, well, I know because I was involved with them on this, was heavily, heavily, heavily involved in that. And after that, for the next year, Solomon, and I was with him in various locations in London, Greece, etc. Spent a good deal of time trying to market that. And we had a session in Toronto. I remember Jim being at the session in Toronto as well. So, there really was and continues to be just massive, massive, massive effort, from this group of people to provide relief for Americans abroad on these issues.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And this is, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Anthony. Well,
this is sort of what I remember from the 2017, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, is that I believe that it was going to cost too much to give relief to Americans overseas. And so I think the same thing that was the reason for FATCA, pay-go budgeting, right? FATCA was a pay-go offset to revenue neutral spending. And pay-go is the biggest lie in the world. It's a total lie, because it's all imaginary. It's all imaginary that FATCA is going to raise $1 billion a year, right? The fact that it actually costs the IRS more money to administer than they get in is sort of ignored now. It's like FATCA, so pay-go is the promise that is never honored. And I think that's one of the issues that you have, is that there's this pay-go budgeting is the problem. And that was a reason I recall given that, we couldn't include it because it was going to cost too much.
I don't know if there was ever any conclusion it would cost too much. I'm not sure that, at least what Solomon has told me on this, I may be wrong or I may have misunderstood him, but I don't think so.
Okay.
Was they were not able to cost it, right? And and that was actually part of the problem. But one thing, But one thing listeners should know that I think many people don't know is that if you look at all of these horrible one-off laws that have been so damaging for Americans abroad, they're almost all, if not all, revenue offset measures.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. On this, even FATCA, right, was a pay-go revenue off. Every single one of these.
Right.
And what this means, interestingly, is this, right? That, when these laws come in, I mean, they're extraordinary. Nobody can understand them because of the way they're written. Nobody. And then, you get to the revenue offset part at the end. I mean, who cares about that, right? Because that's a sideshow. So what you have here is Americans abroad being scapegoated to become sort of the revenue offset provision. But because they're a revenue offset provision, one, nobody in Congress even knows what it is. But secondly, they don't discuss the offset provisions, right? If there's any discussion at all on these things. So what's happening is that behind the scenes, you've got this, devastation of a community, the community of Americans abroad, that's bigger than some states. In some sense, it's even a civilization, right? Of people marketing America outside America, being, consistently, regularly devastated through these revenue offset provisions. FATCA, or the whole, the exit tax was also a revenue offset provision.
Right. Oh, yeah.
In a context where there's not even any discussion about them, right? Let alone the fairness of it. And this is another reason why I am absolutely convinced that the only solution to this, there's only one solution that will solve this problem for all people, all the time, under all circumstances, is the complete and absolute severance of citizenship from tax residency, like the rest of the world.
Like the rest of the world. Right on. Yeah, that's well said. So here we are. Thank you, John, for that. So here we are. Let's just, so our next step. So kind of we have the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So it's like, why not just give it up here, Jim? I mean, kind of get your hand slammed in the piano a little bit. So why don't you just give it up?
There's some things that overlap here too.
Okay.
Because the hearings in 2017 were a very significant step in this whole effort. And again, along the theme of this is a battle the Republicans overseas have been fighting for a very long time. And you were involved in that. John certainly was very involved in it. but that came out of, I can tell you when that initiative started was during the 2016 RNC convention. It was in Cleveland. Two of our members, Ruthie Lieberman from Israel and Mark Zell from Israel, at the convention met with Mark Meadows and Jim Jordan, who were congressmen at the time. And Congressman Meadows was chairman of the House Government Operations Committee.
Yeah. Yep.
They met, I believe, separately with both congressmen, and they found a lot of interest from them in looking into the issues around FATCA. And we had a meeting at towards the conclusion of the convention. We had a lot of people there, maybe 12 to 15 or so. And so we had a Republicans Overseas wrap up of the convention. And during that meeting, Mark and Ruthie both kind of updated us all on their meetings with Congressman Jordan and Congressman Meadows. And they said, look, these guys understand FATCA. They know how bad it is. They want to help. They want to do something. They're thinking about, possibly holding hearings on the subject. What do we do? And I don't know whether it was foolish of me or not, but I kind of rose my hand at the meeting. I said, all right, I'll take that one. And this was July of 2016. And at the time, John, were you at the convention? I can't recall. I don't think you were in 2016.
No, it was at the convention, though, I know somebody who was, who after the convention called me about this as well. So I was aware that was a topic of discussion.
We quickly got you on the team. I remember that. That's right. Okay. So what we did then, Anthony, was we put together a group that over time varied, but there were probably, I'm thinking 8 or 10 of us. We met by conference call weekly, but Solomon, Mark Zell, John, Keith was on it. Stephen Quiche from Canada. You remember Stephen?
So actually, that was who. Stephen was the chair of the Alliance for the Defense of Canadian Sovereignty, right? Going back,
yeah.
Canada lawsuit, and I guess Stephen would have been my connection, if you will, to you.
I think that could have been it. Yeah, Stephen may have introduced you to me. I can't exactly. I might be wrong about that. All right. So Anthony, we initially anticipated that the hearings would be conducted in the fall of 2016, and that we'd need a little group, a little committee to prepare a panel. And 60 days later, we'd be done, and we'd move on. So we met weekly by conference call, and the purpose of the conference call was to prepare for the hearings. Well, the hearings kept getting delayed, and they kept getting delayed into the 30 days later, 30 days later, 30 days later, and they didn't get conducted, as you know, until late April of 2017. Well, we kept this committee going the entire time. And by the time those hearings were conducted, I think you recall we were darn well prepared. We had a great, well prepared. Solomon had formed a very good relationship with Senator Rand Paul.
Yeah.
You'll recall that he
showed up. Yeah.
Very highly unusual for a senator to come to a House subcommittee meeting. But the way the whole thing was kicked off was Senator Paul came in and testified in the House of Representatives on our behalf, and very powerful statement. I think you had prepared the video of Donnelly Nelson, right? I recall.
Yep. Donnelly Nelson. Yep. I prepared a video of Donnelly Nelson. She was forced to renounce her U.S. citizenship because of FATCA. And she did, and it was it was so difficult for her. I talked to her, I had her as a guest. It was such an emotional, she was vomiting over the whole thing. I mean, it was just, she couldn't believe how much her identity was tied up in being an American, even though America's making her life impossible. And that was really something to see someone's like, I can't, and she fell in love. in Switzerland.
Yeah.
And the punishment for falling in love in Switzerland is like, oh, you can't live a life, you can't have a bank account.
Yeah.
And we presented that to and by the way, Donald Lane Nelson is a Democrat, and this is an issue affecting everyone. And we're like, okay, well, that should be pretty good. I mean, that should convince some of the Democrats here, like, hey, what do you think, huh? Here's someone who's like, look at her, she's not lying, she's devastated by this. And
very
it was
powerful.
Presented in there,
very, very powerful,
incredibly
testimony.
powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And by the time we got to, you see, what we didn't realize for a long time is how many people we could have on the panel. You just, none of us had, and Jim Bopp had testified in Congress. John had of course, has testified multiple times in Canadian Parliament, but we just didn't know how many seats we're going to have on the panel. We could have put 10 people on the panel if we were that well prepared.
On the panel?
As it was, sorry?
I could have been on the panel?
Oh, yeah. What I meant is we could have, what I meant to say is, and I may misunderstand, that we had so many people well prepared by this point that had Congress had 10 seats to testify in Congress, we could have put 10 experts on that panel if there were enough places for people to sit down. There were three seats. Jim Bopp, of course, was our lead, led our testimony, and he was masterful, absolutely masterful. Jim has at that point had argued, I think, 13 times in Supreme Court. He'd won like 9 of those cases.
Yeah, one of those was Citizens United. He was
that's correct. He was the lead attorney on the Citizens United case. Jim was just masterful. And then Mark Crawford was on the panel. We chose Mark because of his unique position that a prominent American in Albania. He actually founded a financial institution. It was a bank in Albania. And the board of directors denied him to have an account in that bank because he's an American. You can't make this stuff up. You can't, so he was on the panel, and we also had, and I think one of the unsung heroes of this whole hearings was Daniel Kutel from Switzerland.
Oh, right. Yes.
Daniel, and unsung hero, I say, because I can recall spending a fair bit of time with Daniel. He's not someone who speaks in public very often. He's an IT guy. And his story is that he lost a job during the financial crisis, as so many people did, had trouble finding work. And he got a job in Switzerland. He and his wife moved, 2 kids, set themselves up in Switzerland, doing enormously well. American success story.
Yeah.
He also was a U.S. Army veteran. And politically, well, you mentioned Donald Lane Nelson was a liberal Democrat.
Yeah, right.
Daniel loved the guy, but he described himself politically as being to the left of Bernie Sanders at the time. And but his testimony was incredibly powerful. Here's a regular, and he had to. The reason Daniel was forced to renounce his citizenship over banking in Switzerland and over just his ability to have a mortgage. And so that's how we ended up with the 3 people who were on the panel, Jim Bopp and Mark Crawford and Daniel. 3 very, very broad perspective of how to address the issue. And what stands out in my mind is recollection. You guys both probably remember this. 2 times I remember that audience gasping. One was when Elise Bean, who was the witness for the Democrats, and who was the principal author of FATCA, while sitting next to an Army veteran, and Daniel we didn't know he was going to do this, but it was brilliant. He had his Army uniform. He put it right on the table in front of him.
Yeah.
He had his expired passport. He put that on the table in front of him and told his story. Sitting to his left was Elise Bean, and she made a remark that 10,000 people renouncing their citizenship a year really isn't a big deal, because there's 700,000 people that want to immigrate to the
That's
U.S.
right.
And the audience gasped. You could hear it across the.
I was
don't know if
one.
that.
Yeah.
I
No,
don't
I
know
was
if
one. I recall being admonished. Yeah. Right. I think
I-
that was the one. Right. We all like.
I can't believe it.
Whoa, she
And
said it. Like,
right.
what?
And the
Yeah.
other time was under Mark Meadows' questioning, and he got pretty tough at times with Elise Bean. Under questioning, she admitted that her preference would be that FATCA be implemented domestically in place of the 1099 process. At that one,
right.
remember it? The
Right.
whole
Oh my God.
audience, you had a hearing room full of tax professionals. And when she said that, the place just about fell on the floor in unison.
Yeah.
And it was a reminder to us that, hey, this FATCA thing, it's the canary in the coal mine.
Yeah, right. And and I just want to quickly mention, Elise Bean did give the testimony, and I was gasping. Those were the two times I gasped the most, but I was rather animated because she was saying things that she didn't understand about the law. She claimed she wrote. She claimed she wrote FATCA. There were 15 things, 15 things she got wrong in her testimony. And I have a video on that. If you go to YouTube, IRS Medic, search Elise Bean FATCA hearing, and you will see, we go through it. She didn't even understand her own law. By the way, what I recall her testifying to is that she was a law school professor. That's what I recall. But there's actually a more recent video out that was published in which she says, "Oh, she's actually a congressional investigator for the last 30 years." So, whoa. She didn't seem like she was quite honest about what her background, what she was doing, and so that's the idea. And the idea is like, I'm not sure she didn't write FATCA, is what I've concluded. Wherever it came from, I don't know, but that woman did not write it. Why is she saying she wrote it? I'm not sure. But there's no way you can't get 15 things wrong about a law you wrote. You can't. You just can't. So that's just something I would bring up. So anyway, so here we are, and now I do. Yeah, go ahead.
Point. So my recollection is that Elise Bean was the counsel to the former Senator Levin's subcommittee on permanent investigations, and when Senator Levin retired, he actually became the scholar in residence at some law school in the Detroit. It may have been Wayne State in Detroit.
It's Wayne State is where she's from, right? That's a law school she's affiliated with, right?
That she would have followed him there to some extent. Okay, speculation on my part, but that's what I think. Probably she meant. I think it's fairly obvious, okay, that she's not a full-time law professor in that, and I doubt very much that.
Right.
I mean, I think that she and Senator Levin may have been sort of the spiritual winds, okay, in the great ship, propelling the great ship FATCA.
Well, I guess the problem is that she's presenting herself as a tax professor, and now we know what tax professors their job is, right? We know, but for the public at large, you're looking at a tax professor as, oh well, they're objective, they're a tax professor. But if she was more honest about what she was really doing, what her other job was, then maybe like, oh yeah, I'm just a congressional investigator and I work here today. I'm a political person. If she was more honest about her position, then that would have been better. But she's approaching this, I'm just a neutral person who just decided to write this law because, that's where we, she's just, it would have been more honest for that. And so that's just sort of, I think, it's deceptive. I would say she was very deceptive. That was the word I would use.
Well,
she was deceptive in her testimony.
She's written a book. You can find it on Amazon. I've never read it, but she has written a book describing all this stuff. If anybody's interested and wants to report back on it.
All right. Yeah. See, yeah, there's some, all right. So look at Elise Bean's book. Oh boy. I don't know if I have the patience. All right. So so here we are. Let's get back on the,
I think one of the takeaways from the hearings, and the reason I elaborate is, so that your audience, again, this theme of we've been at this a long time.
Yeah.
Those hearings were so successful, and when you're testifying in Congress, you got to make sure that your people that are testifying know what the hell they're talking about. They present the topic well. They handle themselves well. They're well prepared, and we did all of that. We did all of the above and established ourselves as I would say somewhat of an authority on the subject. And if now you go talk to congressmen, they're going to hear what you have to say, that type of thing.
Yeah.
And it has continued to pay dividends to this day. I would say the credibility that we built through this whole process, even though, sadly the repeal FATCA was never voted on in subcommittee. That's, like I say, another sad reality. Changing the tax law is awfully darn hard.
That's true.
But that was a big step in the right direction.
Yeah, no, I would say that, that hearing was incredibly successful. I remember just, flying back to Connecticut on a high. It was really something because we did such a great job. The testimony, and then, Elise being, right here, she was indignant towards, Danny. It was bad. It was bad. And it was just disgusting. And I think that's, really one of the things that united people around it. And around is like, oh my God, you just don't even like the amount, tone deaf. Like, are you aware of your surroundings? It is that is Keith who's commenting. Yeah, thanks, Keith. Yeah, Keith was very instrumental in bringing a lot of people together, like Donnelly Nelson. Keith was very, very instrumental on that thing. So thank you so much, Keith.
Yeah, that's right. Keith and I were sitting right behind her, by the way, on that. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So okay. So now the hearing goes great. But the result isn't there, kind of the opposite. So now what's happening after this, after tax cuts?
So then
by the way,
we got the story a little out of sequence.
Oh, wait, you got it out of the way, right.
Because we've talked about the holding bill. Those two things overlap a bit.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right. So now FATCA is not repealed. We have the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act going on. The FATCA lawsuit's denied. What's our move?
A couple of years ago, John and Mark Zell contacted me at almost the same time, but it was during COVID. But they contacted me separately saying, why don't you pull together another tax committee? The tax committee efforts of Republicans overseas after the holding bill and after the 2020 election, it went quiet for a little bit, but not long, maybe a year or so. But separately, John and Mark both contacted me and said, why don't you pull something together, kind of like we did for the hearings. And we've had a tax committee, John, myself, Kim Kettler-Paddock, Mark Crawford, Mark Zell, and we meet regularly. And that's what how the paper that we issued earlier this year that you saw and published. John is the principal author of that. And that is one of the outputs. There were about John is a principal author. It goes through possible remedies of legislative, regulatory, or tax treaty. It is a total solution severing citizenship from residency and ending double taxation. So the reason that's relevant at this point, Anthony, for your viewers, okay, the reason this is relevant is, this whole issue has boiled down to a very effective phrase that everybody gets instantly and immediately. Okay, end double taxation of overseas Americans. Okay, I got a hat right here from the convention that Tony made up. That's what it says there. But the whole issue is boiled down to end double taxation. The reason that paper is relevant is that your viewers and your potential voters need to know that the detail is well prepared, and whatever support, and it's not a hey, you got to do it this way kind of a paper. The paper is something that, in whatever direction an incoming Republican administration wants to go, we are prepared to support that. Just like in the 2017 hearings in Congress, we put a panel up there that really knew their stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Whoever we have to work with in whatever direction the administration wants to go in, we are prepared to support that with the detail that's necessary. So this is way more than just a catchy phrase, although it is a catchy phrase.
It
it's
is
way more than that.
Yeah, you're right.
It's
right.
way more than that. And also, I have to make this point. We can't, as Republicans overseas, presume that we have the answer and you got to do it our way. Okay, we don't want to sound like we're getting out in front of either Congress or Treasury Department or an incoming Trump administration saying, okay, we got this done. That's we've learned that and something we've learned in the last, another example that Trump makes the decisions. He's involved in this thing, and we have to anticipate
and
that he's going to want to know exactly how this thing plays out here. And but we are prepared with the detail necessary to support this in whichever direction it goes.
Right on.
That's something.
Absolutely. Yes, John, you may add something.
What Jim is saying. As I look at this, this whole thing, being rolled out, President Trump's statement, in double taxation, the way people are interpreting this, there's a lot of, stuff saying, well, this has to go through Congress, et cetera. And that would be your legislative fix. And there's no question that would be the gold standard. But I think it's extremely important to recognize, and again, this goes back to a paper that I wrote along with Dr. Laura Snyder and Dr. Karen Alpert in, I think, 2020, called A Regulatory Fix for Citizenship Taxation. This can be fixed, although it's not as good as legislative, it can be fixed by regulation.
Yep.
And I think that's extremely important, right? Because, look, so we have a candidate for president saying that he wants to end the double taxation. Well, remember that the president appoints the Treasury Secretary, et cetera, et cetera. So in our view, this is very viable, okay, regardless of what the composition of Congress may be. And I think it's important for individual Americans abroad trying to, to the extent that anybody can understand this issue, it's hard, trying to understand this issue. The fact that a candidate for president is making this statement is extremely significant, right? Because this is a statement from an individual who would have the constitutional authority to move it forward, right?
This is, and really, and for people who don't quite understand what's going on, you got to think of it like this, is that the U.S. tax code, the U.S. individual tax code is written so poorly that it doesn't define what an individual is. We can only infer, but they mean person, because there's you could be single, married, head of household, widowed, or dead. So, okay, so we can infer that's a person, but other than that, we don't know what an individual is. We don't know that. The regulations define what an individual is. So, hey, look, an individual is someone who resides in America. Boom, you're done.
Well, that's right. At present, the regulation, and just, anybody can look this up. It's the Treasury regulation under Section 1 of the Internal Revenue Code. It's no big secret.
Yeah.
Defines individual as a citizen or a resident. Okay. Now, remember that the reason that you have regulations is to make sure that laws make sense over time, right? And, the whole idea of including a citizen when you've got all these people who, just because they were born in the United States, it doesn't make any sense at all, right?
Yeah.
To define it in that way.
Yeah, exactly. So, you live by the regulation, die by the regulation, which is why it's not as good as a legislative fix, because, hey, new president could come say, oh, actually, we're going to tax everybody, even. And by the way, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, and John has pointed this out to me, U.S. Treasury Secretary can define non-U.S. persons not living in the U.S. as citizens of the United States, tax residents. That could be done too. There's just really no bounds to it. So that's kind of why it's, it has this weakness. And the issue is this, is like, now you actually have some leverage over Congress. Like, okay, don't do it, but I'll do it anyway. okay, now it's just part of the process.
Kind of an in run. It's an in run around the legislative process. Okay, now look, obviously, let's be clear. The gold standard would be a change in the law, right?
Yes.
And this is what what was laid out in the RO paper that Jim describes, right? Essentially getting rid of the word individual, substituting the word resident, along with a definition for what that is, right? But even if you can't get there through Congress, you still got the regulatory route, right? My point is simply this: the fact that a candidate for president is saying this is huge. It's way beyond, a member of Congress saying this type of stuff, right?
Yeah,
Because of the ability to appoint the Treasury Secretary.
exactly.
But
And hey, I just want to interrupt with a comment here because this is how I feel, Sanjay. I feel the same way. This show deserves more recognition. Please smash those likes so it gets more highlights on YouTube. It really is critical. And this is the thing. We're talking right now on the show are the people responsible for getting this outrageous injustice here. It's an honor for me. It is a complete honor. I can't believe it's actually happening. This needs to be watched. This needs to be understood by more and more people. So again, please like and subscribe. Turn it. That helps the video rank. So I just want to mention that because this is an incredible honor for me to have these two individuals as a guest here. So
there are a few. It's not a big group. There are a few others of us that but the group that is sort of following.
Why don't you do you want to give a shout out to some of the people responsible?
Oh, look, yes, Solomon, you should really have him. Solomon.
I got to get Solomon on here. Absolutely.
Yes, has been involved. He's the founder of co-founder of Republicans Overseas. He also has a very strong personal relationship with President Trump. Solomon is key in this thing. And I can talk a little bit about that a bit more as we get into the Trump decision.
Let's get to you. We're going to get that. So, because essentially here we are. Let's set it up here. So essentially we have the foundation. John creates a foundation for here it is. Here's how to do it. Here's the way it can be done. And so that seems like the weapon that we have here. Am I right?
Well, it's kind of we've got. I think it gives us the confidence and the credibility that wherever this thing goes, we can support it. If somebody turns around and said, hey, what's your plan? We don't have to go back to the drawing board and create something. We got it. And that I'll name a few people that John was the principal author. And as John points out, and you know this, Anthony, any solutions that have been drafted on this problem that any one around the world, any group around the world purporting to represent Americans overseas, most of these solutions, one way or another, tied back to something that John wrote. Okay,
right. It all does.
Better have John be the principal author of this paper. But John wrote it. Kim Kettler-Paddock is our VP of Communications. She put a lot of effort into this thing and making it readable for anybody who picks this thing up, and whether you know the details of tax law or not. It's a tremendous resource for us. Solomon, of course, Michael DeSambri, Michael, he's former ambassador to Thailand under President Trump. Michael's an attorney with Sullivan and Cromwell. Michael went through this thing. Mark Zell, chairman of our chapter in Israel, very prominent attorney in Israel. Mark went through this thing. He had his edits go in. You got some tremendous Mark Crawford did. You got some tremendous. Am I forgetting anybody, John? I think those are the 7 or so that. Keith has been key, absolutely key. Oh, he has been. He wasn't involved in. My only point.
Oh, right, he's not a Republican.
Keith,
right.
He wasn't involved in writing this paper. That's right. What Keith has done has been tremendous. It's so many levels for so many years as well. But that's how the paper came together. You want to talk about the Trump decision?
Yeah, now let's get to that. Yeah, right. let's get to that.
And on you mentioned Keith on American Expatriates for RBT. There were 2 interesting posts yesterday. One by an anonymous person who praised the Trump announcement, but also expressed concerns. Is this a flash in the pan? Why aren't more Americans behind this? More Americans need to. It was a very thoughtful and well-written post, and I think I can quote. It's okay for me to quote somebody that responded to that, right? To name someone because it's in the public domain.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right,
Here's
so
a link to the Facebook group right here. There's a link to Keith's group
all
that
right.
he's running.
There's a guy named Jim Foster who said, "Yes, I'm one of those that see Trump and stop. He's so full of false promises. I just can't get excited about anything that comes out of his mouth. I'd enthusiastically support his position if I believed it was sincere, but I don't." I want to answer Jim. It's a lot of people out there that feel like Jim, and in Republicans overseas, I think we're meeting more and more people now that sound like Reagan when he said, "I didn't quit the Democrat Party; they quit me."
Yeah.
And I think particularly for a lot of Americans living overseas, loyal Americans, patriotic Americans who've been living abroad for 20, 30 years, and they've seen this ideological shift away from where they truly believe. I don't know if that describes Jim or not. I wouldn't presume that, but I think, look, he's expressed something that's important. So let's talk about, he says, if I believe he was sincere, but I don't, he would support this. Look, we've been connected to the Trump campaign, Republicans overseas. And in the interest of time, we're running an hour already. I'm not going to get into all the communications. I'll just sort of, in a big blob, lump those together. But at one point, we made but trust me, we're connected with some influence to the Trump campaign. At one point, we made a suggestion that the Trump campaign should consider announcing that they support ending citizenship-based taxation. What followed that suggestion was crickets. As you can appreciate, eyes glaze over, whether it was on a chat or it doesn't matter. Okay. Eyes glaze over, and you get this reaction like, what kind of wonky are you gonna wrap me up in? Look, we get this stuff. We get CBT, RBT, subpart F, PFIX, and all this other stuff.
Factor, right?
Good Lord.
Yeah,
911 means something else to us than it does, somebody in an emergency.
Yeah.
So, and Solomon, I immediately answered and said, it means overseas Americans are double taxed.
Yeah.
It's immoral and it's unfair. And this issue, he went on to say, is just like no tax on tips or overtime or Social Security. It's the same thing. The crickets went from eyes lit up. Everybody got it in 10 seconds.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. Everybody understood. Once you have an understanding of the issue, you can mobilize commitment. And so what followed next was a series of videos. Oh, sorry. What followed? We asked then, could President Trump issue a statement? Because they're asking us for our guidance. Could President Trump issue a statement? And we went back and we, as I recall, requested that he issue a statement or a senior campaign surrogate. Either way, just so long it's credibly tied to the Trump campaign. We went back and said, could you issue a statement that says that President Trump supports requesting Congress to end double taxation of overseas Americans? That was our request. Okay. A couple of days went by. I'm getting nervous. I'm not hearing anything. Solomon calls me up and he says, Jim, write this down. Here's what we're allowed to say. President Donald J. Trump supports ending double taxation of overseas Americans. I just about fell on the floor.
Yeah.
So we asked this in retrospect, a request that would put President Trump in less of a committed position by saying he's going to ask Congress to look into this. The issue got to President Trump, and he came back with that statement. Okay, and Keith is right. Nobody knows what CBT means, and I think we need to abandon it, Keith. But what?
And keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah, but I think that's part of the answer to Jim Foster. Is we asked our request was a weaker request, a less committed request than what President Trump personally came back and said. This is what you can say. President Donald J. Trump supports ending double taxation for overseas Americans. Bang.
And I got to say, I was a little skeptical. I'm like, okay, we might be wishing a little bit here. I didn't hear anything from him. So when I did watch the video where he actually said it, was really an incredible moment to witness. Yeah, we are a little bit over time.
It gets better. Let me hustle through it. Let me hustle through it then.
Okay.
It gets better.
All
Look, right. we then were asked to provide guidance on surrogate videos, and several surrogate videos were released to us, which we dropped one day apart. Former cabinet secretary Ben Carson, a sitting congressman Byron Donald, and the former vice chairman of the Democratic National Committee, Tulsi Gabbard, prepared videos in support of this. Those videos alone are a greater statement of support for ending double taxation than you've ever seen before. Time permitting, you can put the Tulsi Gabbard video up. I know you queued it.
Yeah, I do have it. It's on the Republicans Overseas. I have it queued up here. It's on Republicans Overseas. Let's see how much. Hopefully,
you got time.
To my fellow Americans who are living abroad, your vote is critical. We need strong leadership to protect our freedoms that are under attack, to walk us back from the brink of World War III and nuclear war, and root out the deep rot of corruption that exists in permanent Washington. Now, President Trump is committed to fighting for the American people and putting our interests first, not the interests of permanent Washington and the military-industrial complex. President Trump wants economic freedom for all American citizens, no matter where in the world you may be. And that's why he's committed to ending the double taxation of overseas Americans. Your voice and your vote will make a difference in this election. So please make sure you're registered to vote. And I want to invite you to join me in voting for President Trump so that we can begin the serious work toward a future of peace, freedom, and prosperity for all Americans.
Wow.
Holy cow.
Wow. I got to say something. She presents well.
She certainly does.
Wow.
She certainly does. Former congresswoman, very courageous.
Yeah.
And so we could go on and on about that and the other videos, but that's what we had at that point. We were dropping these videos one day apart. And of course, and again, I think you see it in this Jim Foster comment here, is President Trump serious about this? And we went back to the campaign and we said, look, we need a validation from the campaign, because here we are, we're out there, Republican, Solomon had at this point prepared a video, an excellent video that he introduced that ties to the statement from President Trump. Solomon's got a great video out there. Others have been doing the same. So we released these videos one after the other, but we still needed a validation from either President Trump or the campaign. Here we are out there, and without, great. Tulsi Gabbard has said this, but we're visiting. What we did here, and if we'll just pause that before I...
Yeah, hang on. Yep, the audio is not running. So yeah, I got that. I'm just getting it lined up here.
I'll be quick. Again, we went back to the campaign and said, look, it doesn't have to be from President Trump. A tweet from a senior surrogate that supports this, anything that ties to the campaign or the president is going to work here. Days went by, and I'm sitting here thinking, here we are pregnant with this announcement, and we may not get a tweet supporting it. And again, now this was during Hurricane Milton, and I'm had evacuated from my house. I get a call from Solomon, and he said, President Trump is not going to issue a tweet. He said he's going to do his own video. And it just floored. And again, I would say that's how it happened, Anthony. That's how it happened. We asked for a tweet either from President Trump or from a key surrogate. He came back and said, no, I'm doing a video. And that's a video that you have queued up.
Yeah, that's the one I have queued up here. So we'll just play. And it's not. I don't think it's the whole one. It's just a 30-second.
It's about 2 minutes, I think.
Yeah, this one's only 30
happen.
seconds. This is the.
Oh,
Bring it back, and we're going to bring it back strong. Once and for all, I'm going to end double taxation on our overseas citizens. You've been wanting this for years, and nobody has listened to you, and you deserve it. And I'm going to do it. It's the right thing to do. And no American leader has ever been willing to stand up and commit to you the way that I have on many things. But this is a very important element for your safety, security, and frankly, for your wallet. And we're going to bring it back,
Wow.
and we're going to bring it back strong.
What? I mean, that's sort of where it's hard for me to even believe it. And it's, there seems to be, I mean, look, if he's selling it too, there's some, it doesn't seem to be just words on the screen,
That's not what we asked for.
Yeah.
That's not what we asked for. That's what he came back with. So
you think
is he serious about it? You tell me.
Right. Well, I mean, he's writing a big check. He's writing a big check.
I'll tell you something else, and I hope I don't embarrass Solomon with this one, but there's another piece to this that demonstrates the commitment.
Yeah.
I was talking to Solomon yesterday, and President Trump signed a hat, sent it to Solomon with the pen, and a little note. I don't know what a little note might have said between him and Solomon, but I think that the reason that's relevant for your audience is not because it certainly Solomon deeply appreciated it, but it's again another gesture that President Trump knows who we are, that our leadership has credibility in his eyes. He respects what we're doing, and he's behind us.
Wow. Amazing. Wow. This is I think there might be a few comments we want to get to. And I think, some comments on Puerto Rico. We have some content on Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is a territory. There's this, this crazy taxation there, but but right, you can, if you live in Puerto Rico, you're not subject on your Puerto Rican income. Because if you live in Puerto Rico, have other worldwide income, guess what? You got to file a 1040 NR. So that's not exactly an actual fix to the problem. That's why, we've been talking for years that the only way to solve this is to end double taxation. And, it's funny is that that phrase double taxation is something that's escaped my lips for the years, because it is a better way to frame the issue. But whenever you look at every tax treaty, it starts with those two words are there. This tax treaty is to prevent double taxation. And guess what? There's not tax treaties in every country. So then what does that mean? That means double taxation is the thing that exists.
Well, and if I can jump in this one, I was sitting watching. I had just gotten our television connection actually after the hurricane a couple nights ago. I'm sitting there watching Larry Kudlow show, and on comes Art Laffer. So today's Wednesday, so I'm pretty sure it was the Monday, would have been October 14th show, and Laffer launches into the exact argument that Solomon made. Yeah, there he is. Art knows us. That's Mark Crawford on the left, our chapter president for Albania. That's Tony Rodriguez in the middle. He's our regional VP for Asia and chapter president in Thailand. And Tony had these hats made up for the Republican National Convention, and on the back of it, it says "End double taxation on overseas Americans." Art Laffer gets this story. His comments on Larry Kudlow's show were not spur of the moment, but he went through precisely, and I'm sure he didn't talk to Solomon about this, but he precisely went through the exact same argument that Solomon made, and that Solomon has made on interviews with the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere, Financial Times he was in. But what Laffer did on the Kudlow show was say, look, we got to end taxation on double taxation on overseas Americans. We got to end no tax on tips or overtime or Social Security, and we got to do something about ending double taxation on overseas Americans. And he sees it as a continuity of issues, and he also sees the competitiveness angle. What we were talking about at the start of the show.
Right.
He very much. I mean, this is now. Why is this significant, Anthony? That's the father of Reaganomics talking.
Yeah, no. For those of you who don't know, the Art Laffer is a big deal. And actually, when I think of Art Laffer, I always think of Ferris Bueller's Day Off when Ben Stein is talking about. He talks about he talks about Art Laffer in that stuff. So yeah, no, he's a big deal, and he's kind of a brand name. And what I notice is Trump likes brand names. If it's an established brand name, that means a lot. So incredibly helpful to have his support on this. Amazing.
Yeah.
So here we are. It's just it's really amazing what's going on. So
I'll share.
I do have to get. Yeah, go ahead.
You're running out of time. I got to share something else though. Carrie McQuiston, who's a senior advisor to Republicans overseas. She's a former candidate for governor in Oregon. She's former mayor of Baker City in Oregon. Carrie posted on her Facebook page that since this was announced, now this is 4 or 5 days ago, that the campaign has calculated $50 million worth of media benefit from this announcement. $50 million. Now that's a good number, Anthony. I've since verified that with Solomon, and he said it's okay to use it. So the campaign is seeing this as a whopping big benefit to them. Just the media exposure alone in the last since I guess Thursday or so is a tremendous hit for the campaign. There's more to come. I can tell you that. The one I will tell you, Greg Swenson, who's our chapter president in the UK, is going to be on Maria Bartiromo on October 22nd. So the media, and that's a whopping big. When has one of the major business channels ever had even a slightest segment on the taxation of overseas Americans and on the double taxation issue? Never. Yeah. So the exposure continues. This is seismic in its nature.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. Now, John, can you believe we're here? Can you believe we're having this discussion now?
You know, I've been involved in this for so many years that I actually can.
Okay.
You know, because of the dedication and commitment of the people involved. Absolutely. But I mean, I can understand if this sort of, came out of left field, without any background in it, that people would be skeptical. But we are where we are today, precisely because of the commitment of people like Jim, Solomon, and others.
And you have been incredibly helpful. And I mean, you have
been, there's all an awful lot, well, not an awful lot, a small group of very dedicated people who've been at this for, since.
It is a small group. We are a small group. It's crazy.
2016. So am I surprised? No, I'm actually not. And, the thing that I find interesting about this is that I think that regardless of the outcome of the election, I think that what this does is completely change the climate, the understanding, and the appetite for discussing this issue.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is something that is important for the election, of course, but I think goes way, way beyond it.
Way beyond. Wow.
I have to join Tulsi Gabbard, though, in urging Americans abroad, Americans overseas, to look long and hard at this. We certainly have been committed to this issue for 10 years, and I urge you to register to vote. I urge you to support Republican candidates across the board, including President Trump. Register and vote for your Senate candidates, for your House candidates, and on behalf of if you've made your life overseas, children and grandchildren, their lives are going to depend on the outcome of this election as well.
Yeah,
and for them,
absolutely true. That is absolutely true. So many people fail to see this. They don't see this. The RO commitment to this has been because it's a moral issue.
Yes.
Primarily. This is a moral issue more than anything else. We talk about it in terms of the language of citizenship or double taxation, but this is an issue of the kind of world that particularly for Americans abroad, that you want your children, your grandchildren to live. There's a lot of time to think about how this affects you as an individual. This is a time to look at how this affects broadly your community, the country you actually live in, your children, their grandchildren, your grandchildren, etc. This is the way to view this. And, to reiterate what Jim has said, like it or not, the Republican Party is the party, okay, that has put energy into ending this problem.
Yeah. And that is the truth. And here it is. So I want to thank both of you so much for today. And I do hope to get Solomon on. And so be sure to like and subscribe, turn on those notifications so you don't miss that when we go live. So I'll reach out to Solomon. Jim, John, thank you and everybody should be thanking you for what you've been doing and this hard work. And so I think we've clearly established this was not a spur of the moment decision by Donald Trump. I think that at least has been established, but rather this has been the hard, dedicated work of a remarkably few amount of people aligned. But I think we have the moral case on our side, and that's probably the thing powering us the most. So I just want to thank both of you for joining. This is Anthony Parrott of IRS Medic. Thanks for watching.
Thank you, Anthony.
Thanks, Anthony.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you for all your